Hi folks, this is Sean McLean. I've been working on a little kind of pseudo project or series that I'm calling SN Architecture Extras. And I thought it might be a good idea to kind of recap a little bit. I've been through, this will be the third one of this little series. And one of the things that we did was we talked about building basic architecture, not scoped architecture. We'll do that maybe later if I get another chance. But we were talking about kind of the basic architecture of ServiceNow as a platform. And in doing so, one of the things that we identified was there's a whole bunch of things that tie into ServiceNow, right? When you go to any table, there's all these pieces. There are menus and modules and tables and access controls, and then all the other bits and pieces. Now, in the second of the series, we talked about update sets and how you could track and control all of those things that you're building on the platform. But for now, I think it's worth saying what we're going to do is just do that first bit. We're going to build a table into which we will see menus and modules and access controls for our mini table. Now, to that, I also wanted to remind people what our expectation were. We had a set of expectations or requirements that we would build an airports table, a table that would track things like the name of the airport, the abbreviated name of the airport. You know, some airports are MCO or TCO or YYZ. And so we would track both of those things. And then in our fictitious environment, we would put what office that's closest to. So we'd probably have a link to the locations file somewhere. Maybe we'll build a field for some notes for, what gates are good to know about or those kinds of things. And maybe another field for, the alert level of that airport. So that's our general requirements. Now, also, we incorporated that into an update set. And so we have our live update set. And now we're just going to build the table. So I want to see if I can do this in under 10 minutes, which I think is pretty doable. So if we take a look, all tables, we're going to this level, we can go to tables in the system definition. And it's nice to get the idea that all of ServiceNow's tables are stored in a table, which is a little bit meta, but it's still kind of nice to know and good to keep in mind. So really, all we need to do is we go to this table as the administrator and choose new. Now, when I go to build a new table as the administrator, there are several things to keep in mind. First, and this is kind of one of those, I think people don't think about it, but when I name my table, I'll call mine airport. And then when I click on any other field, the system generates a name for me, U, which usually means user generated. And then the name of whatever I wrote up here. So that's kind of handy to know or think of or be aware of. But then also, remember in our architecture, we had those menus and modules. And so the system kind of says, I'll create a new menu. And we remember that menus are over here. And I'll create appropriate modules for this table that I'm about to build. So the system's going to build records in those other tables in our architecture for us. So just to kind of keep in mind, when we build this, the system is going to also build records in this table, and this table, and this table, and this table, all just to help keep this straight for me. So it's doing a lot of the work. Now, the other two tabs I'll point out about that are kind of worth noting. In the Controls tab, we can mention whether we're going to use auto numbering. I should also mention that auto numbering links to, go figure, another table. Some people have jokingly called that McLean's rule. Everything's a record in a table somewhere in ServiceNow. But it's kind of that deal. If I go to auto number, the system takes a prefix from the label and then goes to a different table called the numbering table and creates a business rule that will automatically iterate the numbers. So I'd have, record 1, record 2, record 3. And we can talk more about that if we get a chance. But then also while we're talking controls, we'll notice that the system is going to generate another record in another table. That is the role table. And that role table is going to create a role tied to the table that I'm getting access for, and it's going to create access controls for me. So this is another set of records in the access control table for the table I'm building, the airports table. Now that means there's going to be an access control for read based on this role. And if I tell it to, it will build access controls for create, update, and delete. Now I can also point out whether this table is going to be accessible to other scoped applications or whether it's going to allow web services or integration with it. And that might be a good idea, so we'll assume that that's going to be the way that that works. Now, just a couple more quick things. I'm going to go into columns here, and in the columns, I'm going to point out that right now there aren't any, but we had the ones from our requirements that are easy enough to go to, right? We had a name and an airport code and a location and a couple of these. So let's just take a look at some of the tables I can build. I'll call this first one airport name. And you'll notice as I type it, the system is going to ask what data type. Now what doesn't show in here is underneath the name there is a SQL field. That's the data database kind of name, which would be u_airport_name. And we'll say that most of these fields are probably going to be, and let's look at the data types for me. Now later when we get to some of the easier ways to build tables and tools, they may only show that there's 10 different or 12 different data types. But if I look, there's 54 data types. So we can get as far out as we want, but the point that this series is, basic, right? So we can see that we can do things like color fields, which I'm going to get to, and most of the data will probably be string. So I can fill that in here, and I'll type string. So I say string data. So there's my airport name. Oops. I have to remember to check the box, right? Then I have airport code, and we'll assume that that's string. If I don't specify, the system will assume string as a default. Now remember, we have a locations table in the platform, right? So I might say to my airports, nearest office. This could be helpful because if I'm sending somebody, I want them to know, where's the nearest office location, so they can find the airport closest to where they're going. So we'll call this nearest office location, which of course under the covers will be u_nearest_office. So keep in mind your naming can get a little long if you're not careful. And we'll make this a reference field. When this is a reference field, then the system's going to want to know what table is it going to reference. And that, of course, would be the locations table. And if I look at location, you'll notice there's imp location, which we know is import, and CMN, which we talked about in the last recording of this series, was common. So we're going to say that go to the table that is common to locations, as common data shared through most of the system and applications. So those are most of the fields. Let's come back and check our requirements, right? I have a code, a location. Oh, I need an alert level. Well, perfect. I wanted to point this out because there are many different data types for fields. So one of those data types is a color. That's one that people don't often use much, but for airports it might make sense. I could do red, amber, yellow, and it'll show a little box next to that. And maybe it might be nice to have, I could have an image field with maybe an image map or something for that. So I could do airport map. And what's the other thing? A notes field. Maybe, all the good restaurants or all the gates or things to keep in mind. The security lines are long here or something like that. Now that one I'm going to say is a text field, a string data as well. And I'm going to remember to check the box. But for that one, the default length, I might want to be a little bit longer. Default, I think, is 100 and I'm not sure, so I'm going to try to figure that out and write it up on this recording. But I could say that I want this to be, long enough to write some pretty decent notes. So maybe what I'll do is say maybe 300. So this will be long enough to put some notes. And then that last thing that we said was maybe an image field, so that I could put, a picture of the airport gates or something with it. We'll call it airport map. Right? And I'll do image, and I'll post that up. Now, if I look at this table and we're to get to this aspect of building the table, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fields. And then when I'm done, we remember from kind of what we just talked about that when I hit submit or go on this thing, it's also going to build these other records, right? It's going to build And if I was using mobile, it would build a mobile application for it too, but I don't know that that's necessary, so I'll uncheck that. But it's going to build a record in the menus table and a record in the modules table. It's also going to build a record in the roles table, and it's going to build 4 records in the access control table. So this one action was actually going to do a lot of other work. So rather than submit, I'm going to hit save. And the reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to point this other thing out about tables. When you build a table, regardless of what fields you think are important, in the ServiceNow platform, there are 6 additional fields that are always built. And that is some people refer to them as auditing fields. But if we think about it, every record in every table has a sysid, sometimes called a GUID or a generated unique ID. Similarly, every record in every table has ways to track all of the records. Who created the record, so created by. When did they create it, so created date and time. Who updated, so an updated. When did they update it, so an updated date and time. And then how many times has this record been changed, so an updates integer. So these core fields, I forget whether it's 5 or 6 of them, I think, are added to every single table that you build. So it's useful and important to know about that. Likewise, we now know that if we look at our table, we'd see records about those things. Now, here's the other thing I wanted to point out. As we built this table, we know that we also built menus, modules, access controls, roles, and those other pieces. So let's take a look. At this point, if I were to type airports, hey, look, remember I said that the number for the lists would be plural. So we called it airport, knowing that it would generate this. And if I go to airports, it generates a list of records. And you'll notice what it's showing for me are all the fields in pretty much the order that I noticed that I had numbers, so it added that in there. And maybe it's not quite the order that I want, and I can move that around as I go. Also, if I were to click to New, the system will generate a form. Now you'll notice this form may be not quite the way I want it to be. So in that context, I can go around and modify the form in a couple of different ways, which we'll kind of do in the next area. But I wanted to, at a high level, point out, so we'll do my airport, MCO. And so that name is Orlando. It's the Orlando International. And I think there are 5 terminals. I forget. And I can add an airport map. We'll put the alert level as green, just to see this work in action. You'll notice it puts a little green dot next to it. So that's building a table and how easy it is. Now, when I go on a little deeper, we'll see if we can do the modifying this form and some other tricks. But now we know, looking at our architecture, that building a table builds these pieces. So we've built, if we look at this whole big thing, we've built one of these, some of these, one of these, one of these. So almost like a third of the system gets built automatically when we build a table. Oh, and a role too, right? So when we think about the platform, it's kind of nice to know that that much gets generated. So I hope that's helpful. One more, I always like to sneak a trick in there too, right? These are all records in different tables, right? As an administrator, I could go to the modules table just by clicking this little edit module. I always find this kind of fun. You know, we're so used to building records that are, you know, all text, right? But we can see the title of this module is airports. But it doesn't always have to be text, right? I could do this and use an emoji. And I can also put hints. And I'd say the order is 100. We'll talk more about orders and modules in the next piece, and a little bit more about kind of the aesthetics of building a good form. So if I go like this and I update, it may take a minute. But then when I go to look at my airports, I get a little airplane by it. Clever trick. Actually, it was one of those things another instructor, Mr. Ben Forrest, kind of was playing with that and showed me, and I was like, wow. And now I use this to kind of show. I don't know that this is necessarily practicable, but it's nice to kind of think about how flexible the system is. So with one lesson, we built tables, we built modules, we built menus, we built access controls, we built roles. So we got a lot done in a short time. I hope this is helpful. I hope you stay tuned for the next iteration or the next session that we do. Thanks.